Welcome to the Power Book of Podcasts. Unlock your potential with powerful book summaries that inspire personal growth and broaden your understanding of the world. Each week, we explore life-changing ideas, from leadership to mindset strategies to keys for happiness and success. Learn actionable insights to apply in your daily life. Join our growing community of thinkers and seekers. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button now. It's time to supercharge your mind with the Power Book of Podcasts.
All right, so welcome to our deep dive, everybody. Today, we are taking a look at strategic thinking. And for that, we are going deep into Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War.
The 33 Strategies of War.
Exactly. And we are going to be working with excerpts from Greene's book and nothing else, no other sources.
Okay, good point. Because you might be thinking war. That sounds a little intense for, my daily life.
Yeah.
But Greene actually uses it as a metaphor for the challenges, the conflicts we all face every single day. At work, relationships, you name it. It's that strategic thinking that we need.
Okay. So how does he say we should approach these everyday wars?
Well, he emphasizes this Metis mindset. It's like the Greek goddess Athena, known for cunning, intelligence. It's about outsmarting your obstacles, not overpowering them.
So instead of charging in Ares, the god of war,
Yeah.
we should be more strategic, like a chess player,
Exactly. But here's the thing, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up. They get stuck in tactical thinking, focusing on those day-to-day tasks and missing the big picture strategy.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I mean, you get so overwhelmed by deadlines, by emails, that you kind of forget what you're even working toward.
Right, exactly. You lose sight of the big picture. And that's where Greene's ideas can really help. Strategic thinking helps you elevate your perspective. You start asking, what are my long-term goals? How do my daily actions fit into that larger picture?
So it's less about just reacting to every little thing that comes your way and more about making choices that are more deliberate, that get you closer to where you want to be.
Precisely. Greene actually says tactical people are heavy and stuck in the ground. Strategists are light on their feet and can see far and wide.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. I like that imagery a lot. It really captures that difference. So listeners, think about those moments in your life where you feel stuck in the ground. How can you maybe elevate to that lighter, more strategic way of thinking?
It's a great question to ask yourself, for sure. And it kind of leads us to another crucial point Greene makes. Knowing your enemies.
Okay, wait a minute. I don't think I have any enemies.
Well, this is where Greene gets a little unconventional. He's not talking about outright antagonists, villains in your life, but he's talking about anything that subtly works against your goals. So think about bad habits, procrastination, limiting beliefs. Those are all enemies in a way.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Those are definitely forces I battle with.
Exactly. And they're sneaky, right? Because we don't even realize sometimes how much they're holding us back.
So it's not about being paranoid, but about having this awareness of, okay, what are these things that could derail me if I'm not careful?
Yes, exactly. Awareness is key. So Greene shares this story about Hernan Cortez. He landed in Mexico with this group, and some were secretly plotting against him.
Ooh, what did he do? Did he, confront them head on?
No. He suspected treachery, right. But he never directly confronted them. Instead, he pretended to go along with their plans and allowed them to reveal themselves.
Oh, wait, so he played dumb to expose them?
He did. He used their own impatience, their desire to undermine him against them.
That's pretty clever.
It is, right?
Yeah.
He appeared weak on the surface, but he gained more control.
Oh, that's a great lesson. I mean, I know so often we just rush to react in situations without really understanding the full picture. You know what's really going on.
Absolutely. So think about your own life for a second. Who or what might be subtly working against you? And maybe it's something you haven't even acknowledged yet, right? Once you identify these enemies, you can be more proactive, less reactive in those situations.
Yeah, that's given me a lot to think about already. Okay, so we've got our enemies in sight. What's the next step in this whole strategic playbook?
Well, Greene talks about the counterattack strategy. The idea here is to wait for your opponent to make the first move. It gives you a chance to learn their strategy and see their weaknesses.
That makes sense, especially if you've got someone who's super aggressive,
Yeah.
They just charge in without thinking. You let them make the first mistake, and then you capitalize on it.
Exactly. One of the best examples of this is Napoleon's victory at the Battle of Austerlitz.
Yeah.
He was outnumbered, but he intentionally made his army look weak, luring the Allied forces right into a trap.
Ooh, okay, so this is like military-grade rope-a-dope, right?
It is. He made them think they had the advantage, so they got overconfident, they overextended, and then bam!
Yeah.
Napoleon launched his counterattack at the perfect moment, and crushed them.
Wow. He turned their strength into a weakness.
He did.
That reminds me, just how often do I personally jump into a situation and feel like I have to react right now?
Right.
I probably could benefit from being more like Napoleon, a little more observant, patient,
It's a great takeaway. It's so easy to get caught in that cycle of reacting to everything that comes your way. But sometimes a more patient, observant approach, it can be much more advantageous.
Absolutely. All right, listeners. So time for some self-reflection, right? How often do you rush to react? And what situations might a more patient approach work better?
It's all about knowing when to hold back and when to strike.
Exactly. Now, I want to shift gears a bit here. Let's talk about how Napoleon actually structured his army. Because this, surprisingly, is super relevant to our modern world of information overload.
It is.
So tell me more about that.
So instead of one giant, rigid army, he divided his forces into independent corps, and each of these corps could operate autonomously. They could adapt to the situation on the ground.
So he basically created mini armies that could think for themselves.
He did. Greene calls it controlled chaos.
Great.
It allowed for way more speed and flexibility than traditional armies. His opponents were often totally confused by this decentralized structure.
I can see why. You're expecting this big force and suddenly you're dealing with multiple units coming at you.
Right, they're adaptable. Yeah.
And think about how relevant that is today. We are bombarded with information, constantly having to adjust to new tech, new ways of working.
It's a lot.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. So how do ordinary people apply this controlled chaos to our own lives?
Well, think about building teams and projects that are flexible, that are adaptable. You empower individuals to think for themselves, make decisions, adjust to those unexpected challenges as they arise.
It reminds me, of that German military concept of Auftragstaktik.
Yes.
Which basically means mission command, where, officers are expected to understand the overall mission, and then they're given the freedom to act independently to achieve it, sometimes even disobeying direct orders, as long as it serves the mission.
That's a great point. It emphasizes independent thinking, initiative, trusting the people on the front lines to make the best decision based on what they see.
Yeah. So for all of you listening, how can you apply this to your own teams or your projects? How can you give the people around you more autonomy, more flexibility? It's a great question to consider. And it leads us to another important topic, morale. Because even the best strategies fall apart if you don't have a motivated team.
Totally. And so how do we build a team with strong morale? What's Greene's take on that?
Well, he's really adamant that people are far more motivated when they're focused on a shared cause, a purpose, rather than just personal gain.
So it's about being part of something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. He uses Lyndon B. Johnson as an example. Johnson was known for his very demanding leadership style, but he also inspired this incredible devotion from his assistants.
Interesting. What was his secret?
He understood the power of praise. He would push his team really hard, but then even a small gesture of appreciation would have a huge impact on morale.
Oh, interesting. Like he created this need, this desire for that positive feedback, so that even a little bit went a long way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't talk about morale without talking about Napoleon. He was famous for being present amongst his troops, sharing their hardships.
Oh, yeah. Eating their rations, riding with them into battle, making them feel like they were all in it together, fighting for something important.
And that's such a key part of it. Greene actually talks about emotional contagion. Enthusiasm and fear, they spread very rapidly through groups. Leaders who understand this, they can use it to inspire their teams.
That's fascinating. So for you listening, how can you foster that sense of shared purpose and that positive emotional contagion in your own work or your life? Maybe it's as simple as just expressing sincere appreciation for someone's contribution or taking the time to really clearly explain the vision that you have for the team.
Those are all great starting points for sure. But we also need to be aware of the danger of groupthink.
Okay, so tell me about that. What's groupthink and why is it so dangerous?
Well, groupthink is when the desire for harmony overrides rational decision-making. People end up suppressing dissenting opinions just to avoid conflict, which can lead to really bad decisions.
Yeah. Greene actually uses the Gallipoli campaign as an example. It was a costly failure largely because of the British commander, General Stopford.
Yeah, he was so focused on maintaining a sense of harmony, he completely ignored warning signs. He dismissed anybody who disagreed with him.
It sounds like he had a serious case of yes men around him.
He did, and no one dared to challenge him, even when they could see that disaster was looming.
It's a good reminder that, as a leader, you want to have a unified team, of course, but you also need to encourage people to think critically, challenge assumptions. You need those diverse perspectives.
Absolutely. There's a great quote from the Prussian Prince Frederick Charles. He said, "His Majesty made you a major because he believed you would know when not to obey his orders."
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's a great quote.
It's about trusting your gut, even when it means going against the grain, speaking truth to power.
Absolutely. So for you listening, how often do you maybe conform to group pressure, even if you have some doubts? When might it actually be crucial to speak up, even if it risks disrupting that harmony?
It's a crucial question, especially in today's world, because we are bombarded with information constantly. And it brings us to another strategy, the blitzkrieg.
The blitzkrieg.
It's about speed and decisiveness. You overwhelm your opponent before they can even react.
So it's not just about being fast. It's about being bold, decisive, cutting through all that noise and just making things happen.
Exactly. And in our modern world, right, we are so overwhelmed with information that it can actually paralyze us. So making a quick, confident decision can be a huge advantage, especially when others are hesitant.
Greene uses a great example here. Mae West, the Hollywood actress.
Oh, yeah, she was a trailblazer.
She used speed and unconventional tactics to gain control over her films at Paramount Pictures.
The studio executives, they were used to dealing with actresses in a certain way, and she totally disrupted their expectations.
She wasn't afraid to fight for what she wanted. She pushed for the right to rewrite her lines, influence the blocking, the camera angles, essentially becoming, a co-director on her own films.
She did. And she did this by moving quickly, decisively, pushing for her demands at those precise moments when the studio was most vulnerable. They were forced to react emotionally instead of strategically.
Yeah, she was so smart. I mean, she shifted the battlefield to unfamiliar territory, she knew that the executives weren't as confident when it came to artistic control.
Right.
It's a brilliant example of how speed and decisiveness can disrupt the status quo and give you the upper hand.
It is.
So for our listeners, how can you use this blitzkrieg approach in your own, projects or negotiations? Maybe it's about being the one to propose a solution, to set the agenda, to take control of the narrative before anybody else can.
Be bold, be decisive.
Now let's move into the realm of misperception strategies.
Ooh, misperception.
Which sounds a little bit like mind games to me.
It is. In a way, it's about manipulating your opponent's perception of reality. You blur the lines between truth and falsehood.
Okay, I'm already fascinated.
So, think about it. Humans are naturally prone to confirmation bias. We see what we want to see.
Yeah.
We interpret information that confirms what we already believe.
That's so true. And it makes us so vulnerable to being manipulated because we're not always seeing things objectively.
Right, exactly. Greene shares the story of Themistocles, the Athenian general, and how he tricked the Persian king Xerxes before the Battle of Salamis.
Oh, okay. I've heard of this one.
It was a huge naval battle between the Greeks and the Persians.
Yeah.
Themistocles, he planted false information that Xerxes wanted to believe. That the Greek forces were disunited, that they were planning to flee.
So he fed Xerxes' ego, his desire for a quick win.
Exactly. Xerxes, eager for that swift victory, fell for the ruse. He led his fleet into these narrow straits of Salamis, right where the Greeks were waiting to ambush them.
Oh, wow. So he used Xerxes' own impatience against him.
He did.
That's brilliant.
It's a great story. And it makes you wonder, how often we're all being influenced by our own biases without even realizing it.
It's a great question to ask ourselves. How much are we influenced by those assumptions? And how can we become more aware of potential manipulation, especially in this world where we're just bombarded with information all the time?
It's almost like we need to develop this healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
Question everything, seek out different perspectives. Don't just take everything you see or hear at face value.
You got to think for yourself.
You do. Now, let's transition to a strategy that emphasizes subtlety and patience. It's called the fait accompli.
Fait accompli. Sounds French and fancy. Tell me more.
It is. It's French.
Yeah.
And it means accomplished fact. So the idea is you achieve your goals gradually, almost flying under the radar. Small steps. You don't want to arouse suspicion or resistance with big, sudden moves.
So it's kind of the opposite of a power grab, right?
Yes.
You're not making a big scene. You're slowly, almost imperceptibly shifting the balance of power in your favor.
Exactly. Greene uses the example of Charles de Gaulle. So during World War II, he was slowly expanding his free French forces while appearing to follow Churchill's lead.
Okay, so I'm seeing the theme here. We've got Cortez, Napoleon, and now de Gaulle. These guys, they were playing the long game.
Yeah.
They were being strategic, not letting your ego get in the way.
Right.
I like it.
So de Gaulle, he used his missions in Africa to build up his army. He got control of some very valuable territory. And by the time he returned to London, he had transformed his image from a powerless general to a major leader.
It's like he was playing chess while everybody else was playing checkers.
He was. It really emphasizes that those slow, strategic moves can be just as effective, even more effective than those big dramatic actions.
Yeah. It's like we often try to force things to happen and then wonder why we hit so much resistance. This is about recognizing that sometimes the most effective path is through small, almost imperceptible steps that over time completely change the game.
They do.
It's like that saying, slow and steady wins the race. So for all of you listening, how can you break down your goals into those smaller, less intimidating steps? Because sometimes I think the biggest obstacle to our success is just our own fear of taking action, right?
Absolutely.
So breaking things down, making them seem more manageable can be huge.
It can be a game changer, for sure. Now, are you ready to dive into the delicate art of one-upmanship?
One-upmanship. Okay, this sounds a little mischievous. I'm ready.
One-upmanship. It's all about defeating your rivals, but without a direct confrontation. You subtly provoke them to overreact and make mistakes that damage their reputation, not yours.
So you're almost like setting a trap for them to fall into.
Yeah, it does require a bit of finesse.
Yeah.
The key here is to create doubt, insecurity in your rival, not by attacking them directly, but making them kind of question themselves.
Okay, I'm already thinking, how could I apply this? So let's say you've got, I don't know, a colleague at work who's always trying to take credit for your ideas. How would you use this?
Okay, yeah. Greene actually gives a great example of this with Ulysses S. Grant and his rival, General John McClernand, during the Civil War. Grant, he knew McClernand had a huge ego, very easily provoked.
So did he, embarrass him publicly or call him out in front of other people?
No, Grant was much more subtle than that. He would do things like, say, taking over a few of McClernand's recruits, knowing that this would trigger him.
And that was enough to make this guy lose it. Sounds a little sensitive.
It was. And McClernand, he fell for it every time. He complained to President Lincoln. He wrote these angry letters to the newspapers. He basically destroyed his own career through his overreactions.
Wow. So he really sabotaged himself just by letting his ego get the best of him?
He did. And Grant came out on top by just, appearing calm and collected while his rival was losing his cool.
That's pretty slick. So it's about making your opponent look bad by doing, almost nothing.
Exactly. And making yourself look even better. It's the brilliance of one-upmanship.
Okay. This is a really powerful tactic. So, listeners, think about the rivals you might have, not just at work, but in other areas of your life. How can you identify their weaknesses? And then instead of attacking them, use those weaknesses to your advantage. Maybe it's just about resisting that urge to react defensively when someone criticizes you. Let their actions speak for themselves.
That's a great point. Let their actions be their downfall. Now, let's shift gears here a bit. Talk about a strategy that's incredibly relevant in this world where we have constant information, overwhelming resistance with speed. Greene calls this the blitzkrieg strategy.
Ah, yes, the blitzkrieg. I remember you mentioned this earlier, and it really stuck with me, this idea of hitting fast, hitting hard, like you're breaking through a wall of inertia.
That's it. The blitzkrieg strategy is about disrupting expectations.
Yeah.
You're forcing the other side to react emotionally rather than strategically.
Yeah.
So they're on the defensive right from the beginning.
Yeah. I like that analogy you used before about the boxer, throwing that lightning fast punch out of nowhere. The opponent doesn't even see it coming.
They don't. And Greene highlights Erwin Rommel here, the Desert Fox, as a master of the blitzkrieg during World War II. He repeatedly used speed and surprise to outmaneuver his opponents in North Africa.
So it's not just speed, it's also the element of surprise.
Absolutely. It's about catching your opponent off guard, making them feel like they're always one step behind.
Yeah.
And, this works in so many situations, not just war. What about, a business negotiation?
Oh, yeah, that's a great example. I mean, if you're going into a negotiation, if you can control the pace, set the agenda, make the first bold offer, you're already at a huge advantage.
You are. You're setting the tone, right? You're dictating the terms of the game before the other side has a chance to get their bearings.
Yeah.
Greene talks about creating a setup, like a lull before the storm, so to speak. You might start by emphasizing common ground, right? Making it seem like things are going to be very cooperative. And then bam, you hit it with the unexpected.
Oh, that's good. That's clever. It's almost like a psychological play, you know? You're making them feel comfortable and then you disrupt that sense of ease.
You do, exactly. Now let's talk about another strategy that plays with expectations. This one's called the ordinary extraordinary strategy.
Okay. Ordinary, extraordinary strategy. That sounds intriguing. What's that all about?
So it's a two-part process. First, you do something ordinary, something that just conforms to people's expectations. You let them fix their image of you in their minds as predictable, as reliable. Then, when their guard is down, you hit them with the extraordinary.
Okay. So it's like a bait and switch, but on a grander scale.
Yeah, you lull them into a false sense of security, and wham.
Yeah.
You know, the classic example here, of course, is the Trojan horse.
Of course.
Right.
That's the ultimate surprise attack. And it's so terrifying because it comes from a source that seems so, benign.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Greene actually uses the example here of Hannibal, the Carthaginian general. He marched his army, including elephants, over the Alps.
Elephants over the Alps.
I know, right?
That's amazing. I can't even imagine the logistics of that.
It was a logistical nightmare, but it was also brilliant strategically.
Oh, totally.
Because the Romans, they never expected an attack from that direction. They thought the Alps were impassable.
So he disrupted their entire, perception of the battlefield?
He did.
Yeah.
Once he was in Italy, he continued to alternate between these conventional and unconventional tactics just to keep the Romans off balance.
So he's playing with their expectations, making them doubt their own, perception of reality.
He is.
That's pretty awesome.
It highlights the power of unpredictability.
Yeah.
When you're unpredictable, you keep your opponent guessing, which gives you that psychological advantage.
That brings us back to that idea we talked about earlier about being light on your feet as a strategist.
Yes.
Being adaptable, able to shift your approach as needed.
Precisely. Now, let's delve a bit deeper into those misperception strategies that we touched on earlier. Remember, it's about manipulating your opponent's perception of reality, making it hard for them to even distinguish truth from falsehood.
Yeah, this is next level psychological warfare here.
It is.
So give me the lowdown. How does this work?
Well, remember how we talked about confirmation bias? People tend to see what they want to see.
Yeah.
So a skilled strategist can use that, can exploit that, by crafting a narrative that plays into their opponent's desires and biases, even if it's not entirely true.
So you're basically feeding their existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are, a little bit off, a little bit based on flawed information.
Exactly. Greene shares a great story here about Themistocles. We've talked about him before.
Yeah.
And how he deceived the Persian king, Xerxes, right before the Battle of Salamis.
Oh, yeah. He's the one who tricked him into thinking the Greeks were going to run away, right?
Yes. He sent a message to Xerxes pretending to be a traitor, claiming that the Greek forces were divided, that they were planning to escape.
And Xerxes, blinded by his desire to have this quick victory, swallowed it.
He did. Themistocles knew that Xerxes was driven by impatience and, the need to prove his dominance. And he used those desires against him.
Yeah, that's so clever. It's a reminder that we all have these biases, and they can be used against us if we're not careful.
It's crucial to develop that critical eye, to question what we see, what we hear, seek out multiple perspectives. Don't just blindly accept the information that's presented to you.
Yeah, especially in our world today. I mean, there's so much information overload and just constant spin. We need to be, really discerning about what we believe.
We do. Now let's talk about the fait accompli strategy. Remember, this is the one where you achieve your goals gradually, almost without anyone noticing, flying under the radar.
Right, yeah. It's the opposite of making a big scene, a big power grab. You're almost slowly kind of infiltrating.
Yes, and you're gradually shifting the balance of power without making a big fuss.
Exactly.
Think about Charles de Gaulle again.
Oh, yes.
Steadily building up the Free French forces during World War II, all while seeming to follow Churchill's lead.
He was playing the long game.
He was, yeah.
He used his missions in Africa to expand his army. He gained control of these key territories, and all without directly challenging Churchill's authority.
He did. That's a powerful concept.
Yeah.
And so relevant to our lives today.
Totally.
Think about it. We often try to force change to happen, push our agenda through sheer willpower, and then we wonder, why are we encountering so much resistance?
Yeah, we're like the bull in the china shop.
Right. And maybe we need to be more like de Gaulle, more strategic, more patient.
Exactly.
The fait accompli is about recognizing that sometimes the most effective path is through It's through patience, subtlety, and strategic maneuvering.
It's about taking those small bites, right?
Yes.
Swallowing little territories before anyone can object.
And they add up over time. So for our listeners, think about your goals, right? How can you break them down into smaller, less intimidating steps? How can you gradually introduce new ideas or initiative without triggering resistance?
Yeah, maybe it's about starting a new project on a small scale first, proving its value, and then you gradually expand it over time. Or, slowly building your expertise in a certain area, making yourself indispensable before anyone even realizes what you're doing.
Those are great examples. It's about being strategic and patient, recognizing that sometimes the most significant changes happen gradually, almost invisibly.
Under the surface.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. Now, I think we have time for one more strategy before we wrap up this part of our deep dive. One-upmanship.
Excellent choice. One-upmanship, it's about using your opponent's energy against them. You subtly provoke them to make these self-destructive mistakes.
So this sounds like don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
That's it. You let their own actions be their downfall. Greene uses the example of Ulysses S. Grant and his rivalry with General John McClernand during the Civil War.
Oh, yeah. Grant knew how to push his buttons and make him just self-destruct.
He did. Grant knew that McClernand was ambitious, and he had a very fragile ego. So he would, subtly provoke him with things like taking over a few of his recruits.
And McClernand would predictably overreact, making himself look bad. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best way to win is to not engage at all in a head-to-head battle, but to maneuver your opponent into a position where they defeat themselves.
Precisely. It's a strategy that requires patience, observation, a deep understanding of human psychology.
So for our listeners who are, interested in applying this strategy, what are some key takeaways here?
Well, it's about being a keen observer of human nature, right? Pay attention to the people around you. What are their weaknesses? What triggers them?
Okay.
And once you've identified those weaknesses, resist the urge to exploit them directly, because that's just going to make you look bad.
So rather than calling them out, you kind of find a way to push their buttons, almost like set up a psychological obstacle course for them to stumble through.
That's a great way to put it. You plant a seed of doubt, you create a situation where they're more likely to make a mistake, and then you just step back and watch them fall into the trap.
But this seems like it takes a lot of self-control, too. Because you can't let your own ego get in the way, right?
It does. You can't.
Ah.
The goal here isn't to humiliate your rival. It's to neutralize them as a threat without damaging your own reputation.
Exactly. So you want to be strategic, not vindictive.
Now, let's shift our focus a bit to a strategy that's all about taking control of the narrative, shaping how other people perceive the situation. Moral warfare.
Moral warfare. Okay, this sounds pretty intense, so tell me more.
Moral warfare is about presenting yourself as the righteous one, the defender of good, while casting your opponent as the villain.
So you're waging a war of public opinion.
Exactly. You're trying to win the hearts and minds of people, turning them against your opponent. Think about, Martin Luther.
Yeah.
The German priest who sparked the Protestant Reformation.
Oh, yeah, he challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, right?
He did.
Okay. How does he fit into this whole moral warfare strategy?
Oh, he was a master of it.
Yeah.
He used his writings, his sermons, to expose what he saw as the corruption, the hypocrisy of the church. And he rallied people to his cause.
So he framed himself as this champion of the people fighting against this powerful and corrupt institution.
He did. And the church, by responding with heavy-handed tactics, they just made Luther look even more sympathetic.
Oh, wow. It's almost like that Streisand effect,
Right.
The more they tried to, suppress him, the more attention he got.
Exactly. And this idea of moral warfare, it's so relevant today.
Oh, yeah.
Think about how often we see moral arguments used in politics, in the media, in all kinds of social movements.
Totally. It's a powerful tool of persuasion because it really taps into our emotions.
Right.
Our values, our sense of justice.
It does. So how can we use moral warfare effectively? First, we need to be very clear about our own values and principles. What do we stand for? What are we fighting for?
And then we have to be able to explain that to other people in a way that connects with them.
That's crucial. It's not enough to just be right. You need to be able to persuade others that you're right. And that requires understanding your audience. What are their values? What are their fears, their aspirations?
You need to speak their language, make them feel the righteousness of your cause.
You do. It's also about being able to expose what you see as the hypocrisy and moral failings of your opponents,
Okay.
but without resorting to personal attacks.
Right, because when you stoop to that level, then you lose the moral high ground.
You do. The goal of moral warfare is not to destroy your opponents, but to win over the hearts and minds of the people.
Yeah. That's how you achieve real, lasting change, right?
That's how you do it. Okay, so we've talked about directly attacking your opponent, outmaneuvering them, winning over the public. But what about those situations where the best move is to just kind of disengage?
To walk away. That seems kind of counterintuitive, when we're talking about strategies for winning.
I know. But Greene argues that sometimes the most strategic move is knowing when to disengage, to cut your losses, move on.
So it's not about admitting defeat, it's recognizing when a battle's no longer worth fighting.
Exactly. It's about being realistic about your goals, your resources, your chances of success. Sometimes the bravest, smartest thing you can do is just walk away from a situation that's draining you, even if it means giving up on something that you've invested time and energy in.
Yeah, he uses the Vietnam War as an example here, right? I mean, it dragged on for years, cost countless lives.
And achieved very little.
Yeah. I mean, the Americans couldn't defeat the Viet Cong.
No.
Who were using, guerrilla tactics.
And sheer determination.
Yeah, and the war became increasingly unpopular, obviously, at home. And eventually, the U.S. just had to withdraw.
It's a tragic example of what can happen when we get so focused on winning that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
So how can we apply this exit strategy to our own lives? It seems like the first step is just being honest with ourselves about our goals and, our chances of success.
That's a great place to start. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to achieve here? Is this battle, this conflict, this relationship truly worth the cost?
Sometimes the most courageous decision is to just walk away, to cut your losses and create space for something better.
You got it. Now let's shift gears and talk about a strategy that's all about speed and surprise. The Blitzkrieg strategy.
The Blitzkrieg. We talked about this before, but I'm always up for hearing more about it. This idea of hitting your opponent so hard, so fast, before they even have time to react is just so compelling.
It is. It's designed to create shock and awe, paralyze the opponent's will to resist. Think of like the German invasion of Poland in 1939. It marked the beginning of World War II.
Yeah, they use this combination of, tanks, aircraft, and highly mobile infantry to just overwhelm the Polish defenses. And it was a stunning victory. It changed the course of the war.
It did. And this concept of blitzkrieg, this lightning war, it's not just limited to the military. It can be applied to any situation where speed and decisiveness are key. Business negotiations, launching a new product, even responding to a crisis.
Yeah. If you can act decisively while everyone else is still trying to figure out what's going on, you've got a huge advantage.
You do. You're putting the other side on the defensive. They're reacting to your moves.
So for our listeners, how can they apply this Blitzkrieg strategy to their own lives?
Maybe it's launching a new product or service really quickly before your competitors can even catch up. Or taking decisive action on a problem at work rather than letting it fester and grow.
So it's about being bold, taking those calculated risks, moving with a sense of urgency.
It is. Now let's talk about a strategy that's all about subtlety and indirection. The indirect approach.
Okay. The indirect approach. Ooh, that sounds sneaky and strategic. I love it. So give me an example. How does this work?
Okay, think about the Battle of Thermopylae, where this small force of Greek soldiers held off this massive Persian army for several days.
Oh, yes. The 300 Spartans, one of the most famous last stands in history.
Exactly. The Greeks, they were led by King Leonidas, and they knew they couldn't defeat the Persians in a direct confrontation, so they chose this narrow pass at Thermopylae where their smaller force would have an advantage.
So they basically used the terrain to create like a bottleneck, right? Funneling the Persian army into this narrow space where their numbers wouldn't be as effective.
Exactly. They understood the limitations of their own power, and they chose a strategy that maximized their strengths and exploited their opponent's weaknesses.
So it's classic David and Goliath, where the smaller, weaker force uses strategy and cunning to overcome a seemingly insurmountable challenge.
It is. And even though the Spartans were ultimately defeated, their heroic stand at Thermopylae, it bought time for the other Greek city-states to prepare for war. And ultimately, the Greeks defeated the Persians.
So even in defeat, they achieved a strategic victory.
They did.
They understood that sometimes you have to choose your battles, and even a loss can be a win if it serves that larger strategic purpose.
That's a powerful point. So for our listeners, how can they apply this indirect approach? Maybe it's about recognizing when they're up against a much stronger opponent, and choosing a strategy that avoids that direct confrontation.
Yeah, maybe it's about finding allies, building coalitions, using the strengths of others to compensate for your own weaknesses.
Or maybe even just choosing to walk away from a battle that's not worth fighting in the first place.
Yeah. Sometimes the best way to win is to not play the game at all.
Right. Now let's talk about a strategy that sounds like it's straight out of a magician's playbook. The strategy of misdirection.
The strategy of misdirection. Okay, tell me more. This sounds exciting.
It's all about creating a smokescreen. Distraction, illusion, deception. You want to make your opponent focus on the wrong thing, while you maneuver yourself into a position of advantage.
So you're making them think you're going one way when you're actually going another.
Exactly. Think about, Harry Houdini. He was a master of misdirection, right? He would use elaborate stagecraft to distract his audiences while he was performing his escapes.
Yeah. By the time they realized what he was really doing, it was too late.
Exactly. The key is to create a diversion that captures their attention so they don't notice the subtle moves you're making.
So you're creating a mental blind spot.
You are. And this can be used in almost any situation where you want to gain some leverage. A business negotiation, a political campaign, even a personal relationship.
Yeah, it makes me think, how often do we get caught up in, arguments or debates, focused on winning the argument or proving our point, and we lose sight of what we're even trying to accomplish in the first place.
We do. This strategy of misdirection is about stepping back from those head-on confrontations. Find a way to shift your opponent's focus, and then use that opening to subtly steer things in a direction that's more favorable to you.
So if you're dealing with, say, a really stubborn opponent, someone who's just fixated on one point of attack, you can use misdirection to get them to start talking about something else, and that creates an opening for you.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about a strategy that's about creating a sense of inevitability. It makes your victory seem like it's a foregone conclusion. It's the fait accompli strategy.
Ah, yes, the fait accompli. This is the one where you achieve your goals gradually in small steps, almost like without anyone noticing.
I got it. It's like you're slowly boiling the frog, so to speak. Your actions seem so natural, so inevitable, that they don't even register as a threat.
Greene uses the example of the Roman Empire here, which gradually expanded its territory over centuries. They didn't conquer the world overnight. They did it bit by bit, absorbing new lands, new people.
They were masters of the fait accompli. They'd use military conquest, diplomacy, even cultural assimilation. And they would often offer generous terms to the people they conquered. They'd let them keep their customs and traditions, as long as they acknowledged Roman authority.
So it was almost like a strategy of integration. And over time, these people became part of the Roman world, their cultures blending with Roman culture, their identities merging.
It's a fascinating example. It's about how a powerful entity can achieve its goals without resorting to brute force. It's slowly shifting that balance of power until your position is just so strong that resistance becomes futile.
Yeah, this makes me think about companies like Amazon or Google. They started small with a simple idea, right? Like selling books online or, providing search results. And then they steadily built up these empires. They've become so deeply integrated into our lives that it's almost impossible to imagine the world without them.
They are masters of the fait accompli. They didn't stage this, grand power grab. They just slowly, steadily, almost inevitably expanded their reach.
So for our listeners, how can they use this strategy?
Maybe it's gradually introducing new ideas at work rather than trying to force them through all at once. Or maybe it's slowly building up your skills in a particular area, making yourself indispensable. It's recognizing that sometimes the most meaningful and lasting changes, they happen gradually beneath the surface.
So playing the long game, you plant those seeds and then you nurture them until they blossom. I like that. Now, I think we've got time for one more strategy before we wrap up this part of our deep dive: one-upmanship.
One-upmanship. It's about using your opponent's energy against them, subtly provoking them to make self-destructive mistakes.
It's almost like a psychological game of chess, right?
It is. You use their own moves to your advantage.
I like that. Okay. So Greene gives the example here of Ulysses S. Grant, and, we talked about his rivalry with General John McClernand during the Civil War.
Yeah, Grant knew how to push McClernand's buttons.
He did.
He knew that McClernand was ambitious, had a fragile ego, and he would subtly provoke him, with things like taking over a few of his recruits.
And, of course, McClernand would overreact, making himself look bad in the process.
Every time.
It's a powerful reminder, that sometimes the best way to win is to not even engage in that head-to-head battle,
Right.
but to maneuver your opponent into a position where they defeat themselves.
Precisely. It takes patience.
Yeah.
It takes observation and a deep understanding of, human psychology.
So for our listeners who want to try to, apply this, what are some key takeaways?
Be a keen observer of human nature. Pay attention to the people around you. What are their weaknesses? What triggers them? What makes them tick?
Okay.
And once you've identified those weaknesses, resist that urge to, exploit them directly. That'll just make you look bad.
Right.
So instead of calling them out, you find a way to kind of subtly push their buttons, almost like you're setting up this psychological obstacle course for them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You plant a seed of doubt, you create a situation where they're likely to make a mistake, and then you step back and let them do the rest.
But it sounds like it takes a lot of discipline too, right?
It does.
Because you can't let your own ego get in the way.
You can't.
The goal is to neutralize them as a threat without making yourself look bad.
Exactly. You want to be strategic, not vindictive.
Okay. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to encourage our listeners to think about how they can apply all of these strategies. Whether it's about outmaneuvering a rival, winning over the public, or maybe just disengaging from a conflict that's not even worth fighting. Greene's 33 Strategies of War, they offer so many insights into the challenges we face.
They do, and they can be applied to everyday life.
Absolutely. And it actually brings us to a strategy that, it might seem a little out of place in a book about war. It's the art of seduction.
Hold on, seduction.
Right.
Like on the battlefield? I don't think they covered that in military school.
Well, remember, Greene's using war as this metaphor
Right.
for the challenges we face.
Right. So the art of seduction here isn't about, romantic conquests or anything like that. It's about winning people over.
Okay.
Disarming them with charm and persuasion instead of just using force.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see the connection. So it's about influence, right? Making people want to follow you, support your cause without having to force them.
Exactly. Think of, say, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt.
Oh, yeah.
She was renowned for her beauty, her intelligence, her ability to charm some of the most powerful men.
She seduced Julius Caesar and Mark Antony,
She did.
two of the most powerful men in the Roman world. I mean, that's some serious strategic seduction.
It is. She understood that power isn't always about brute force. Sometimes it's about persuasion, making yourself irresistible. She cultivated this aura of mystery, intelligence, desirability. People were drawn to her.
So, okay, for our listeners who aren't, aspiring Cleopatras,
Right.
how can we apply this art of seduction in our everyday lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not about manipulation or using your looks to get ahead or anything like that. It's about developing your personal charisma, your ability to connect with others
I like that.
on a deeper level.
So how do we do that? Do we all need to, sign up for charm school? Yeah.
Probably not. I think the best place to start is to focus on building genuine connections with people.
Okay.
Be confident, be articulate, be genuinely interested in the people that you interact with.
So it's about listening, being present, showing that you genuinely care about what other people have to say.
Exactly. It's also about understanding what motivates people.
Okay.
What are their desires? What are their goals? And how can you align your goals with theirs to create those win-win situations?
Yeah. I mean, that would be so powerful in your relationships, at work. I mean, in every area of life.
You would.
Where you're not just trying to get what you want.
Yeah.
You're actually trying to create a situation where everybody benefits.
Exactly. Now let's move to a strategy that's often the most difficult, but sometimes the most important, the exit strategy.
The exit strategy. Knowing when to walk away, that seems a little bit counterintuitive when we're talking about, strategies for winning.
I know, right? But Greene argues that sometimes the most strategic move is knowing when to disengage, cut your losses, move on to something better.
So it's not about admitting defeat. It's more about recognizing when a battle's just not worth fighting.
Exactly. Being realistic about your goals, your resources, and your chances of success.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the bravest and smartest thing you can do is just walk away from a situation that's draining you. Even if it means, giving up on something that you've invested time and energy in.
It is. Greene uses the example of the Vietnam War here. It dragged on for years, cost countless lives, and achieved very little.
The Americans just couldn't defeat the Viet Cong, who were using, those guerrilla tactics.
Sheer determination.
Yeah. And the war just became so unpopular at home
It did.
that the U.S. just had to withdraw.
Yeah, it was a tragic example of what can happen when we get fixated on winning. that we forget the bigger picture.
So how can our listeners, apply this exit strategy to their own lives? It seems like the first step is, being honest with yourself about what you're actually trying to achieve and, how likely you are to be successful.
That's a great place to start. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to achieve? Is this battle, this conflict, this relationship, is it truly worth the cost?
Yeah.
Or is it time to move on?
Sometimes, the best decision is just to walk away, to cut your losses and create space for something better.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War.
It does.
And I have to say, I've learned so much.
Me too.
It's amazing how these strategies, drawn from military history, can be applied to so many areas of life.
They can. And it's a reminder that strategy, it's not about brute force.
No.
It's about intelligence, cunning, being able to adapt.
Yeah, it's about understanding human nature, recognizing opportunities, and making those smart choices to get you to your desired outcome.
And sometimes the smartest choice is to walk away from the battle.
So to everyone listening, remember, choose your battles wisely. Keep your inner Athena close at hand and always be thinking a few steps ahead. Until next time.